everyone. Welcome back to the What Should You Do podcast. I'm Ellie. We got Alex here, my co-host, and then a really special guest. So on today's podcast, we have Lauren Taylor, who is a leader in the movement to prevent and heal from gender-based violence, and is also the co-author of Get Empowered, a practical guide to thrive, heal, and embrace your confidence in a sexist world. Lauren has spent more than 3 decades teaching skills to stop harassment, abuse, and assault, and through her organization, Defend Yourself, she and her team has trained over 35,000 people across the country. So her work has been featured in major national outlets. She also has workshops, and her writing continues to empower people to claim their confidence, their safety, and their freedom. So thank you so much, Lauren, for coming on the podcast today. And I'm excited to learn more just about your background, experience, and the book that you wrote.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm thrilled to be having this conversation with you. I think that women especially, are on a spectrum, like from the nothing will ever happen to me kind of thinking, like some level of denial, to scared all the time. And I grew up, when I was coming up, I was more toward the scared all the time end of the spectrum. And when I was in my late 20s, I took a self-defense class, and it totally changed my life because it liberated me from that fear. I didn't think that nothing would ever happen to me, but I did think if someone tried to attack me, there were things I could do.
Yeah.
And so that not only changed that one aspect of my life, but it affected every part of my life. And it was so empowering and transformational that I wanted to share it with other people. So I learned more and more and learned how to teach, et cetera, et cetera. And, I just want to offer these skills to other people and give them an opportunity to do whatever works for them with them, just like it did for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, you mentioned you took, a kind of like physical protection, self-defense class. And I think that self-defense and understanding that aspect is one aspect of understanding how to protect yourself, especially as a woman, where, there's varying degrees of self-defense that you can do, but there's also a lot of other things that you could do to help you set yourself up for success in the event something bad is going to happen or does happen to you. So if you have situations or scenarios that maybe you could walk some of our viewers through that isn't just, obviously self-defense, great tool to have and definitely something that you should pursue, but other things and scenarios that might be a little more common that a person might encounter just in their day-to-day.
Right. So when I say self-defense, yes, when I first took a self-defense class, which was a long time ago, it was almost entirely how to kick or hit somebody if you had to. But what I teach and what my team at Defend Yourself teach is a much, much broader, holistic set of skills that you can use as you're saying, in your day-to-day for 2 reasons that's important. One is that the day-to-day things, by definition, happen really often, can happen very often, and they not only affect our physical safety, but they also affect our overall well-being. I think of when I was in my 20s and 30s, I had a job where I could actually walk from my house, and it was about 2 miles each way, but I would get street harassed, like sometimes up to 5 times each way, like 10 times a day. And, that constant reminder of the threat of rape and that men, somehow have the right to control your sense of safety, even if it never escalated beyond street harassment, had a huge effect on my overall well-being. And the other reason why the things that are not kicking and hitting matter is that if we can use those other skills like boundary setting and assertiveness, asking for what we want, taking up space, advocating for ourselves, if we can use those skills, we have a really good chance to stop something before it escalates into a physical attack. Street harassment is just one example, but workplace harassment, problematic family members, just intrusive people who stand too close or stare at you or misgender you or basically people who don't respect you in one way or another can show up all over your life, unfortunately. But A part of what we do is about here's some tools, some actual tools, some strategies and skills you can use. Here's how to set a boundary that's likely to be effective. And also at the same time, there's the internal transformation. I have a right to do this. I have permission to do this. Like a lot of us who were socialized female were told things like put other people's feelings first, or don't hurt anybody's feelings, or don't make a scene, or don't be rude, or whatever. And that shuts us down from access to our, human owned right to protect our safety and well-being and respect.
Yeah, I think you make a great point of, I think women are oftentimes brought up to, be nice, be polite,
Exactly.
make people feel welcome and invited, and to kind of roll with the punches, if you will. And I think that there are
And keep the
times,
peace.
yes. And I think that there are definitely times and I think this is whenever situations become so nuanced in how you go about when is the right time to maybe lean towards trying to keep the peace and maybe setting a hard boundary, and what would that escalation potentially look like, and kind of understanding that every situation is going to result in probably you responding in a different way, because you don't know how that person on the other end is going to react. And if you set a boundary, it could escalate things and become worse. But if you don't set a boundary, it could also escalate and become worse. And kind of understanding also like body language and reading those signals and understanding who's on the other side of things, how important that is also in kind of like looking at self-defense holistically.
I totally agree. There's some piece of like, okay, first of all, let's establish that the vast majority of gender-based violence is by somebody that you know. So obviously, if it is abuse in a relationship, in a romantic or sexual relationship, that's 100% of the time it's somebody that you know. But even sexual assault, which people tend to think of as, kind of stranger danger that we were taught about when we were little, If I walk into a classroom where I'm going to teach self-defense and ask people what they are most worried about, the answer is always going to be parking lots, bushes, and dark alleys. And all of those are stranger scenarios. The fact is that 9 out of 10 times in a sexual assault, the assailant is someone that the person being targeted knows. 9 out of 10 times, if you are raped, it will be by somebody that you know. And I think this fact is mind-changing, mind-blowing, life-changing, because first of all, we can relax a little bit around the parking lots, right? And walking alone at night. Because why move through the world with that much fear? Fear is so constraining, right? But also it can help us pay attention to the things that need to be paid attention to for our own safety and well-being, which is the people in our lives and how they treat us. How do I feel when I'm around them? And of course, yes, 1 out of 10 times it is going to be somebody I don't know. And I'm not minimizing the fact that that happens and that we need tools for that too. But paying attention to how the people in our lives, our family, our friends, our coworkers, our acquaintances, our neighbors treat us, our exes treat us, I just can't even say how important that is to your safety and well-being. And then that goes to the point that you're talking about, which is, what do I know about them? What's my relationship with them like? What's my intuition telling me at this moment about which of the many tools that I might have for resisting an escalation do I want to try and pull out and use? We never say like, you should do this or you should do that, because we're not there. We don't know. And there's never any one right answer. It's a set of tools in a toolbox. What we do is honor whatever tools you already have in your toolbox, because you have made it to today, right? You may have experienced trauma. Most of us have, but you made it to today. And now we're going to add more tools to your toolbox, but only you know in any given situation which one you're going to pull out and try. And if that one doesn't work, you can pull out a different one and try it.
So I saw one of the videos, I really liked the point where you were talking to somebody, or you were maybe speaking to a group, and you said, you need to change. We train people to make the assessment or go through their internal way of thinking from what's wrong to what now are my options.
Oh, yeah.
And so I was wondering, how challenging is it to to get people to, because defense is mainly a mindset for a lot of people. And so how challenging is it to get people to start thinking that way? Because you may have been conditioned from a very long time to think one other way. And so maybe it depends on the person, but interested to hear how, what your experience is with that.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. I think that's a super important thing. I think what gets us there where we're just worried about what's wrong is a couple of things. I'm not a neurobiologist or anything, but one is negativity bias, which is a human reality. And it is what has allowed the species to stay alive until today. It's evolutionary survival mechanism. So we are worried in our minds. We are metaphorically scanning all the time for the saber-toothed tiger, right? Because that's what enabled the species to live until 2025, is the fact that if we know the saber-toothed tiger is coming, we might be able to survive an attack. And so we're looking for the 2025 version of the saber-toothed tiger all the time. And so that's why we see the negative things more than the positive things. It's sad, but it also keeps us alive. So that's one reason. And the other is, I think society and culture play into it in the way that you're talking about. If you see TV or a movie where a woman is being attacked, it's always one thing happens and then it's all over, right? She trips and it's all over. It's not okay, and then she does something else. So we've been taught, we've been culturally taught about our powerlessness. So the frame that you brought up that I like to offer to people is, someone grabs my wrist. I could think, oh my God, they have my wrist. What am I going to do? They have my wrist. They have my wrist. Oh my God, I don't have my wrist. Or you could say I got my voice. I got my brain. I got my other hand. I got both feet. I got both knees. I got one elbow. I could get help looking at assets and resources. And I think it's a good question about how hard is it to make that transition. I think once people hear me present it that way, I see a lot of aha going on in the room. That doesn't mean that they necessarily can carry it with them all the time after that, but I think it opens that door into I have other possibilities.
Yeah, the ability to pause and assess. I mean, that's kind of like a muscle where you have to, I don't know if you have to practice that, but that's somebody's first reaction when somebody grabs a wrist can be panic. And so how do you move from panic to assessment?
Right.
Maybe that's just training or practice or,
I think it's both. And I really suggest to people to take a pause, right? Even if the pause is 2 seconds long, it can allow your nervous system to see other possibilities and settle a little bit. And one thing anybody who's ever been a student of mine will tell you is that I am relentless with reminding people to breathe. And so that pause, the moment in which you can take a breath, right? And then you can do that assessment and you can inventory your resources. Yeah, I just think, there's so many things about breathing that it brings us so many things. One of the things it brings us, in addition to what you're raising, is the fact that if there's a threat, doesn't matter if it's interpersonal, like we're talking about, another human is trying to hurt me. It also could be a car accident, a dog bite, a natural disaster. If there's a threat, there's a part of our brain called the amygdala that tells our nervous system that, you have to do everything you can to protect yourself right now. That's the part that if the threat is overwhelming, will tip you into fight, flight, or freeze. And those also are survival mechanisms. I mean, I know people, especially people who tend toward freeze, often blame themselves, why can't I or why didn't I? But again, it's something to be grateful for because it keeps us alive. So if you tip over into fight, flight, or freeze, if you can remember to breathe, which is not a small thing, I'm not minimizing how difficult that is, but if you can remember to breathe, it lets your parasympathetic nervous system know that the amygdala can calm down, which lets your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that does communicating and thinking and executive function, to come back online. And then you're out of fight, flight, or freeze and make decisions and use skills and strategies. I don't know if that was too technical, but all of it leads to, if you could just remember to breathe. And the way to do that is what you're saying, Alex, is to just move through your day you know, bring, I'm going to take a breath now. I'm going to take a breath now. It's not that we're not breathing. We're always breathing, right? The conscious breathing is what makes a difference.
No, I like that. It's the most cost effective strategy you can
Yes.
can take is just
No cost. Yeah, totally.
I think that, you brought up a really interesting point earlier about how we, especially I would say more so women, definitely than in comparison to men, look at, the parking lot, the parking garage, the alleyway at night as like our biggest area for concern in our like day to days. And we go
Yep.
above and beyond a lot of times to avoid it. I know I do at
Totally.
least. But like you mentioned, statistically, it's the people that you know, unfortunately.
Yes.
And I guess for the people that are maybe listening in and are wanting to know, like what are some of those warning signs? What does it look like? What are the first signs that maybe someone is a potential threat to you? And how do you go about kind of that mental process of assessing and deciding what strategies can either A, de-escalate that and put you maybe back into a better placement with that person that is maybe like a family member that you don't just feel like you can just cut off entirely
Right.
right now, or, a significant other that things are starting to go a certain way, and how do you start that de-escalation process for one, but also keep yourself safe, and what some of those signs look like?
So, I mean, there's 1,000 signs, right? And I do want to say that partners and ex-partners, if you look at who the assailant is most likely to be, partners and ex-partners are unfortunately at the top of that list. I don't remember the exact order of the rest of them, but it's like second is acquaintances, which includes coworkers and neighbors and things like that. And then other family members. I don't remember the exact order. So what it would be different depending on the situation. And what I would ask people to start with, even though in some ways this is maybe the hardest thing, is to really feel into how you feel when you're around them. And that might mean feeling your heart. It might mean feeling your gut. But like, are they saying things that I'm like, no? Like, I don't even know how to describe that. But for example, in a relationship, is their default to disagree with you? I see a lot of that. Is their default that their needs are more important than your needs, even if that takes the form of like, where are we going to go to dinner? That could also be with other family members. Do they do things that you have made it clear that you don't want them to do? And it doesn't mean you have to have said, Ellie, please don't use that word when you're talking to me. Like, you've made it clear because you get upset or you avoid them or there are other ways to make it clear. You don't always have to say it directly. But if you do that and they don't respect it, that is the biggest red flag, no matter what your relationship is, right? If you I don't want to do X and they continue to do X, or I don't want you to do X, that's the biggest red flag there is. That should be like end of conversation. Right now, I'm going to say to you, I need you to stop, or that's not okay with me. And if they keep doing it, then you got to figure out what plan B is, whether it's take some space or change the guidelines of relation. One student of ours who was a high schooler, used to just talk about her ex-boyfriend and how she always felt yucky after she was around him, right? Like, yucky is not quantifiable, but it's profoundly important. So,
That's a really great point.
and in a relationship, it also can be things like, says disrespectful things to you, says disrespectful things in front of other people, tries to control, who you see or isolate you. A lot of these things that I'm naming are early signs of verbal or emotional abuse, which then can also move into physical abuse. The problem is that women in particular, although women are not the only ones abused, but women in particular have been socialized that that's how it is. And we don't have any claim to try and make it any different or or we don't even believe we have a right to something different.
That's a really great point. And I think that a lot of it, kind of unpacking or trying to put maybe like a word to what you did there, was almost like if your partner
Yes.
is very dismissive of your needs, because your needs are a form of safety and security for yourself, whether
Yes.
it be emotionally, physically, mentally, you name it. And if you have a partner that's very dismissive of those needs that you have, that's an early warning sign that that could be a trending thing that just continues throughout the relationship and potentially escalate.
Totally.
And I don't think it means that it will not, it 100% means that, you're now going to be in an abusive relationship, but it is I call them like data points that you
Yes.
should probably start looking, because everything becomes a data point, whether it be, relationships, work, life in general, everything is data. And I think to your point too, whenever you mention she couldn't really quantify it, but she felt icky. I think going back to the evolutionary aspect, like we are evolutionary trained to pick up on these subtle nuances that like our brain isn't really necessarily maybe processing, and like you're cognitively fully identifying and processing, but in the back of your mind, or like kind of on this like autopilot version, your brain is taking all these data points in. And if you're getting that weird feeling, I think it's just because that's what's starting to trigger us as, hey, this is a potential threat. And I think women always say like our intuition's so great, but I think that just through the evolutionary process, we have always been maybe a little bit more in tune with those types of things that we start picking up on, because we're at, physiologically a bit of a disadvantage in comparison to men.
Well, I have two things to say about this. I hope we have enough time. One
Yeah,
is,
absolutely.
okay, one is, we not all of us are in touch with our intuition. Like, I think sometimes that also gets socialized out of us because we're so trained to worry about what the other person is feeling and put their needs first, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a very simple exercise that I can describe that people can do to help you get back in touch with your intuition and learn how it speaks to you. So get with someone you trust and stand about 6 feet apart, facing each other. And then you stand still, and the person you trust, your friend or whoever, walks in toward you slowly. And when you start to feel like, okay, this is close enough, you just put up your hand and say, stop. And they stop. Okay. Now take a beat, take a breath, whatever. And then they take another step in. Now they are too close, right? Have whatever it is for you and your relationship with them. If it was a coworker, it would probably be further out. If it's a lover, it's probably closer in, right? But your relationship with them, now they're too close, and your body will feel that as a threat. So take a moment and feel, where do you feel that? And when we do this exercise in class, some people literally feel the hair on the back of their neck stand up. Some people, their breath quickens. For me, my chest tightens. Some people feel it in their guts. Some people feel their palms get sweaty. I don't care how it is for you. What I care is that you know what that is for you, right? So that then when you feel it in the wild, you can be like, oh, I'm not feeling safe.
That's so cool. That's actually such a great exercise.
Yeah, I kind of
love
want to do
that.
it with my wife tonight.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to make Alex come home. My husband's name is Alex too, but I'm going to make it whenever Alex, I know, Alex, and it's like what Alex am I talking to in my day to day. Yeah, seriously. But yeah, that's actually such an amazing exercise. Everyone should try that. Give it a go, actually.
Super interesting. As you were talking about that, I was also thinking about, you've been doing this for a long time. What trends have you seen over the years of, people approach you and maybe voice concerns or things they're dealing with? Has there been a change, and is that tied to age or just cultural changes? That's a very twisted, hard conversation, complex question with a lot of variables, but I didn't know if any trends popped up.
Well, the biggest thing I think I would say is that people are talking about gender-based violence and sexual assault in particular a whole lot more. And we saw a huge shift in that in 2017 with the Me Too movement, and just so many people breaking their silences. But I think it's a longer-term trend, and it has several consequences, but perhaps the main one is is reducing shame and self-blame. So when people don't talk about it, there's a lot of reasons they don't talk about it. Everybody has their reasons, but there are very common shared ones like, I feel like I did something wrong. Why didn't I yell? Why didn't I yell one more time? Why did I go there? Why did I drink that much? It's all a way of putting blame on yourself. This also serves a purpose, even though it's a horrible fact. This is what people do. We do. Okay. But the purpose that this serves is giving me a sense of control, right? If the responsibility were fully on the attacker, then I have no control. Well, the truth is you have some options, but if I think I could have done this thing differently, then I had some control over it. So I think that's a large part of why we do the self-blame litany. If I tell my story and you tell your story and we find similarities and we find empathy and compassion for what we each went through, number one, that's how healing happens. Healing happens in connection. It doesn't happen alone. The violation happened. It was a break of the human trust and bond, and it is healed in connection. So if you tell your story and I tell my story, now we have support and we have a venue for that connection and healing. And also a connection for, you didn't deserve that. Like lots of times people can get totally mad on someone else's behalf, but not on their own behalf. But I know you didn't deserve that. And you happen to know that I didn't deserve that. Now we've got this straightened out. So I think that all makes a big difference. So I think if you look at, younger people today, of course, most people are younger than I am, but mostly we teach younger people. I think they are holding the shame and self-blame much more lightly and are putting the responsibility much more where it lies.
No,
and I know, like people still, no matter what age, still hold, some kind of shame and self-blame. But by saying this, because if I had 100 people in a room and I walked up to each one of them and I was like, okay, somebody attacks somebody or somebody gets attacked by somebody else, a sexual violence, whose responsibility is it? And everybody would say it's the fault of the person who did the harassment or abuse or assault. But moving that from your cognitive brain, the front of your brain, where it's the fault of the aggressor, to holding that in your heart and in every cell in your body is a whole different thing. I could get every of those 100 people in the room to say it's the aggressor's fault, but people are still holding a lot of suffering around self-blame.
That's a great point. And I think it kind of, it goes back to what you mentioned of like wanting to feel that control. And it's easier if you could blame yourself because your actions are within your control versus another person's. I always like to, whenever we have episodes like this, provide people that are listening with resources. Obviously, I know you have your book, so I'd like to highlight that too. But for people that might be either this is like a point of stress in their lives and something that they want to avoid, what resources would you recommend to someone that's kind of dealing with that aspect of it, or someone that has gone through a situation like this and is now kind of battling with the emotional, mental baggage? What resources would you recommend to them?
Well, I would, without going on a whole marketing thing, because this is not why I'm recommending it, I do think the book is there for all of the things you're mentioning, because it is prevention in the sense that we are undoing our socialization and claiming ourselves as people who have rights and who can say no and who can have confidence and ask for what we want, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that can prevent the everyday minor intrusions from escalating. And if you've been harassed, abused, or attacked, which I have to say, you really can't be a woman in U.S. society and have avoided all of those. Maybe there are a few, but the
Very
harassment
true.
thing is like everybody's been harassed. So if you've been through something, which is almost every woman, and the book is a lot about healing and letting go of the self-blame and anyhow, so that answers part of your question. I think finding a group or a therapist that are sexual violence trauma recovery focused. Like, not every therapist knows how to do this stuff at all. And I like groups a lot because, as I was talking about, healing happens in connection, but also because of the community support aspect, the like getting outrage on your behalf and finding my people who I can do my healing with. And also because groups are much more accessible financially, whereas one-on-one therapy, much harder to afford. But most sexual assault agencies run groups for survivors. So I think that's a great place to go.
Ellie, that
Thank you for
reminds
that.
us of a previous podcast where we were talking with a former police officer who helps veterans and first responders with PTSD and trauma. And one of the things he said was that when you're looking for clinical help, find somebody who's culturally competent.
Yes.
It seems like this is a commonality where you're finding somebody who understands the environment that or the situation in which you came from.
Well, I think those are actually two similar and overlapping things, but I think they are two different things. So one is substantively, they're competent in sexual violence or, war or, natural disasters or whatever. There's that. And then the cultural competence is like, okay, if I am an adolescent, you need to understand, adolescence, or you need to understand the religious minority that I belong to, or the immigration, or the race or ethnicity that I am. For example, I teach self-defense teachers in how to be culturally competent with LGBTQIA plus students, right? So that's not the subject matter area. That's the water that the people are swimming in when they come to you. It's their life story around
That's a
them.
really great point. Yeah. I think that's where, when people are seeking out or going and looking for help, I think oftentimes I've heard a lot of people say, I've tried to talk to someone, I tried to do this, and it just didn't work for me. And I think that's where that culturally competent piece comes in, because it's such a crucial part in understanding, you as a person and your situation. And both of those things have to be working together, I think, in order to really get the outcome that individuals need in these types of situations. So...
And just like everything, when you've experienced trauma of any kind, but in my wheelhouse, gender-based violence, we tell everybody, especially when we're working with young people, after it's over, you need to ask for help. And if you don't get the help you need to ask somebody else. And if you don't get the help you need, it's horribly devastating not to get the help the response, that a supportive response and the help you need. But sometimes you have to keep asking. And a lot of that is the cultural competence piece, right? So like if I grew up Mormon and I go to someone who doesn't know anything about Mormonism, I'm not going to be able to have a conversation about any kind of trauma because they don't understand the water I swim in, the water I grew up in. So that can be often things like that, or what you're saying. It's like why it just didn't work for me.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast. This was such a really interesting, I learned a lot from this conversation. So thank you so much. I really want to, all the resources, your book, all of that stuff, I'm going to add in the description of the podcast so everyone has access to it. But thank you again for coming on. We really appreciate your time. This was a great conversation.
Great conversation. I'm so happy that you asked, and we really got into some juicy stuff. So
yeah,
I hope people find it valuable.
I'm sure they will. Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks.
Thank you, Alex and Ellie.
Of course.